cool. We're moving into more territory. This time we're looking at layers, little management of the layers, how to deal with hierarchy, moving them, grouping them, breaking them away from groups, stacking different layer sets, etc. I'm just going to jump right off from where I left with the fills work. This is a file that you'll be able to get from the box ingredients. I made these two objects, one with the pencil, one with the pen, as we saw in the last one, but there are a lot of elements in here. How do I know? I'm going to go to the layers palette, and in the layers palette I can see that there's only one layer. So you said, Greg, there are a whole bunch of layers? You're lying. I see layer 1. But if I open that up, we end up seeing that this layer 1 consists of a whole bunch of paths. And these paths, you can get little samples of what they look like in the thumbnails. But it's a whole bunch. You would never know which one's what. And, to have to go through and name all those paths would be kind of crazy. I think naming layers is really smart. But getting into subpaths could be a little bit too far. But there is a good way for us to identify them and, deal with grouping them, rearranging them, deleting them, etc. So this one layer consists of all of these different paths, and you can identify that the bottom two are the two wine glasses. And if I were to use my little eyeball guy and say, well, which one's that? You can go, oh, it's the one on the right, or that one's the one on the left. It's kind of interesting, losing that original form. Ooh, that could be a really cool way to work with your own art, is to start with something definitive in form and then build around it with new solids and then take that one away and see what's left. I think that's really kind of clever. All right, so the eyeball, we all know what the eyeball does. Turns things on or off. So you could go through, well, which one's this? And you can click on it and eventually locate it's the tiniest little thing at the bottom of the stem. It gets a little frustrating if you have hundreds, if not thousands of these things, right? So another way to identify a layer would be just to select it on the artboard. So I just selected this dark blue sort of shadowy deal on the left side, and I can look over into that group of paths in that layer, and it identifies the one that's selected by this little tiny blue box. So that says, this is the one, it's right here. It's blue because my layer master is blue. So any of these things, if I were to click on them, I'll grab this gray one here, they're going to end up having a little blue box next to them. That identifies the location of that path in that layer group. So things you can do inside the layer would be to reorganize them. I have this orange solid that sits on top of this gray one. Well, what if I want it to be behind it and to have the gray one be dominant? That's just a matter of changing the layer hierarchy here in this area. So I can identify that the orange one is here. It's basically number 3 down. If I click back on that gray one, I can go, okay, so that's there. So I could take number 3 and just drag it and relocate it, and now it's hidden behind that gray highlight because that's what I want, right? You might make things in a certain pattern. This is all from the first thing you drew to the most recent thing you drew. And that's how it stacks it. So that hierarchy is just what's next? What happened next? What happened next? Where do we, boop, 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 boop. So at that point, you might have a realization where you're I need to restructure these things. So to go in and, boop, 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 and kind of make it the way you want it, piece of cake, especially when it's only 20 layers. But if you will have some artwork where it's just hundreds of these things, that gets pretty tricky. So, but it just takes practice. It helps to know how to do it with smaller assignments or projects like this, so that you know how to handle that when you get into the heavy stuff. Okay, so I have one layer for my pencil chalice, and then another layer, and then in that same layer is my pen chalice. What if I want to separate them? so that they can kind of be their own elements that I could work with, turn one on, turn one off. Maybe I'm doing logo work and I just want to have like, okay, this one, I need to move on from it. And I could just turn it off and focus on something else. If I just turn this whole group off right now, everything goes away, right? That should make sense. This is the master and all the children inside of it will also turn off, but I can then manage the children by themselves. So a couple things we'll talk about. That is, I have to move my little window because my window is in front. Let's see if I can do that over here real quick. Can I? You bet. I'm going to go over on this side of the room now. But I don't want to take up that much space. So I'll have to... I'm going to stand over here now. Okay. Boy, that's really disorienting for me, but I can do it. So at the bottom of your Illustrator panel, can I do it? I have to show you this thing. Please come up. It's not letting me do it. Come on, move up. Maybe now I can. You just can't see it in my... Ah! This is my research for animation class. You don't need to see that. The debut of Thomas Cat apparently just doesn't exist. Can I? Ah! This gets frustrating. I want to minimize my window. I'll go to this. Okay, now you can see it. Cool. Ah. You gotta love live theater, people. Okay, so at the bottom of this window are some layer buttons. And the first one that we'll talk about is create a new layer. If I create a new layer, I can see it in this area. It's just a blank layer. There's nothing there. I could draw on that, so I'll get my pencil and, you know, make some weird shape. There it is, and it's on layer 2. I will now get rid of that. And what I want to talk about is moving the layers around and managing them the way that you might really hope to. So this chalice on the right, which was drawn by the pen tool, I want to have on its own layer. This is very easy to do, and I love this trick, and everyone should get used to this because it's going to save your life down the road. I select on it, and I can see that it's selected down here, so it shows me, yep, that's the one. All I have to do to move it is to grab this one on the parent layer and move it and drag it up. And it just said, okay, whatever was selected, we can just move it into this next layer, and it does it. And it just keeps the same position. Everything is the same, only now, if I open that up, you'll see that there's the path that we moved, and it exists in layer 2. So then I could like rename this one, you know, pencil cup, just for the sake of, oh man. And then this one's pen cup. They're not cups, they're chalices. And with them collapsed, I could now identify them a lot easier without having to see all that other stuff. So then we get into some other issues of like, well, what if I want to move my whole pencil cup over? And I go, ah, crap. All those other things are not moving with it. Well, there's a couple things you could do. You could just say, well, I want to drag a box over all of those elements. It's pretty easy to do when it's just that stuff on the artboard and there's nothing else behind it. But if there's other art and backgrounds and shapes and stuff, that selection business gets really difficult, even if it's on other layers. So that's one way you could do it. The other way would be to, you know, go through and just click on all of these things, holding down shift. You could do that. So I could hold down the shift key and go bump, 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 bump. And you can see them highlighting as I go along. That is also a waste of time. What's really cool is that I can just click on that box for that master layer and it selects everything in that layer. How do I know? If I open that up, now all of those boxes are selected. So that was a way for me to say, I want that all of the artwork that constitutes this pencil cup layer. And now when I go to move it, it'll all move with the, as if it was a group. It's not a group, but we can make groups. And we'll get into that a little bit. But you can see if I move it, it's behind the other layer. That is because, and I'll just put in the middle for now. That's because the pen cup is on top of the other pencil cup layer. So hierarchy also exists within master layer groups. So what if I needed that to be different? I would just drag and drop that pen cup to below the pencil cup. And now you can see that it resides below that. So designing your artwork and managing your artwork will eventually lead to you managing layers and the little subpaths and sublayers that exist within them. So it's really good to start thinking about that as you build, because it'll save you some headaches. But you're going to get to a point where you're just going to like make all kinds of stuff, and then you go like, oh shoot, this would be so much easier if this was its own layer and that was its own layer, and etc. So getting an understanding of this management is really kind of hot. Let's talk just about a few other things. So if I open up my pencil cup, what if I just wanted to have the orange highlights existing as sort of their own mini layer, or I'm going to say a grouping, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a group. I could select all of my orange paths. So I've got just a couple of them. I'm going to hold down Shift and just get them. It's a lot easier than having to, oh, there's another one. Boop. It's a lot easier than, I don't know, maybe it's the same. Going through the actual artwork and clicking on them. I like to see them over here because they stand out more. So I have all of my orange layers selected. So what can I do with that? Well, I could do something like we did earlier, where I create a new layer. There's layer 3, and this is good to know. I can now, even if that layer is collapsed, since it has this little box here selected representing all of those layers that I had selected, all I have to do to make those orange layers become their own layer is to drag that up into my new layer. And now that's all the orange stuff, and it exists as its own layer, and it's going to be on top now. What if I wanted to do that with all of my silver layers? Here's a good shortcut. There's way more silver layers than there are dark and blue ones. So I could just click on that box that represents the pencil cup, and you can see that it's got all of those gray solids selected, but I don't want these. So I'm just going to hold Shift and click off of them, and now it's just the gray objects. I could make a new layer again. I don't need to close this because I can just take that master selection button and move it up, and now I've got all my silver layers on their own, or silver paths on their own layer. So then I could rename those if I wanted to. What I'm going to do real quick though is I'm going to undo those moves, because I want to talk about groups. So I went back and I undid it, and I've got at that point where all my orange paths are selected. So I can create a group, and a group is done by going to Object, Group, or Command G. That's another one to get used to. And you just do it with your keys real quick. So now I grouped them, okay? And look what happened in my layers. I've got something called a group. So no longer is it, you know, the 6 paths that were orange. It's now a group, and it looks and kind of acts like a layer. So it's like it's a sub layer basically. And this group I can open up again. Oh, I'm in the wrong screen. I was looking at my recording screen. So that can be opened up, and I can see that this contains all of my orange paths. That's also a really nice way to manage your artwork. So that way I don't have to get too many master layers that are cluttering my work. I can have things standing by inside my master layer as a group. And you know, it doesn't have to be all the same colors. It could be all text, or you know, just different objects that make sense to have them work together. This is something that I do constantly with all of my professional work. Just grouping. Grouping is great. Grouping, however, if you notice that one orange path that I wanted behind the silver one, this guy right here, it's now on top, because a group will take everything and put it together. That now has its own representation. If I needed that one path to live somewhere else, I would have to take it out of that group and stash it somewhere else and just know that that orange piece is not going to be part of the group. That gets a little frustrating at times, but just because of the management of things, as long as you're on top of it, you understand it, and you're making these deliberate moves, then it probably won't burn you too much. So a group can be selected and moved by itself, just like anything else. So I just moved that group to layer 3. I'm going to hit undo, move that out. And groups can be ungrouped. So as a group, they're all selected. If I go to object, I now have the option to ungroup. So there will be times when you group just to do a task, like you just want to move something or you want to resize something, whatever. So you might group elements together, do your move, do your task, and then say, okay, cool, now I'm going to ungroup them just so I can have control over all of them on their own. So the group, as it's selected, if I were to do a transform, it'll rotate all of them together. So it kind of, it does what you would expect a group to do. So I could scale it, rotate, whatever. Also change its color. So it's quite versatile. It's what you do to all these different layers. Layers also have some features about them where if you double click on the word, you can rename it. Or if you double click off of the word and sort of the empty space, you have some layer options. This can be how you define its color for the selections. You can create a template out of it, which means it's going to lock it and it will not print. So this is good for doing things like certain layouts where you want to build some guides and do that. We'll get into that work down the road. You can say show it, don't show it, preview it, don't preview it. These are ways for you to just manage how that layer will perform in your work as you generally either while you work or as you export into a different environment. I'll just hit cancel. A layer can be duplicated very easily by dragging it down to the new layer icon, boop, and now I have 2 of them. So this new one, I could just select it all together and move it over, and now I have a duplicate of that. So duplicating layers is super easy. No reason why you couldn't just duplicate it within the same layer too. That would be by copy and paste generally. That's fine. If you want to see how to do that, I'll turn this one off. We'll go back over here. And if I want to just keep it within the layer, I'm going to use the option key, and that gives me my copy, which is drag and copy. And now if I just drag over, I've got a 3rd cup now, but they are in the same master layer. And I've got one that I duplicated that layer and it lives on its own. What else can you do with these things? Well, you can delete them. So if I wanted to delete my copy layer, I just click on the little trash can and then I can say, yeah, sure, please delete it. And there are a few other things that get a little bit advanced, like this is create a new sub layer. So that's going to create a layer within that layer. And then we've got some clipping mask works, which we'll get into in a bit. Clipping masks are wonderful. And what's this one? Collect for export. That's cool. Didn't know that existed. I always do it from the file menu. I learn something almost every time I work with this class. It's really great. So there's the breakdown of layers. I think that it's really good for you to practice a little bit. Take the cup file off of Box if you want to, or just make your own and start sort of rehearsing what that means to work with different layers, how to select the paths inside, make a group, move elements from one layer to another. It's really fantastic. All right, I hope that was helpful, and we'll hear from you soon.